Okay, so we're going to create two new scripts, and we'll also need to modify the player controller script. So I'll just jump back into assets and then into the scripts folder here and right click to create a new C# script. This one, first one, is going to be called health. And then right click again and create another C# script. And this one is going to be called health bar. Just remember, when you create scripts, it needs to start with an uppercase letter and can't contain any spaces. Okay. So got these two new scripts. We'll start working on the health one first. And this script it's only really going to have one line of code that we need to add to it. So it's basically going to be responsible for storing the actual health value. That's all it's going to do. It's going to store the current health value of the player, and we'll be able to access this variable from any scene or any level in the game and update the health or fetch the health to display it on the screen. So that's all it's going to do, is to store a variable that will contain the player's health value. We won't actually need the start and update methods in here, so we can delete them. All we need is just this health class here, and we're just going to add one line of code in there. It's going to be a public static variable of type float, and I'm going to call it total health, and it's going to be set to 1. All right, and we'll save that script. So health is going to be equal to 1. So health can be a value between 0 and 1. If we go back to Unity, just remember that if we have a look at the bar, that the scale on the x-axis is 1. So at the start of the game, if the player's health is equal to 1, the scale will be 1 for the health bar. And if the player's health reduces to 0.5, then the scale will be 0.5. So the health bar will be half its width. All right, now this health script, it's not actually going to be attached to anything. It's just going to exist in this scripts folder in the game's assets, but it won't actually be attached to anything. The health bar will be, so we'll go into there and write the code for that. So this is going to be attached to the bar, and it's going to be responsible for changing the width of the bar based on the player's health, and changing the color of it as well, making it go red if the health becomes really low. So firstly, because we're going to be working with a UI element, images, what we'll need to do here is add using Unity engine.ui. Okay, and then in the health bar class, just make some space to create a new variable. This is going to be private rect transform, and we'll just call it bar. Okay, so if I just jump back into Unity, if we have a look at the bar here, we can see in the inspector panel it's got a rect transform component, and we're able to access the scale property there on the x-axis to update that. And also, when we want to change the color of the bar, we can access the image component and change the color property. Okay, so we're going to need access to that as well later. So private rect transform bar, and then in the start method, we'll get access to that component. So we'll say bar equals get component rect transform, just like that. Okay, we're going to need to create a couple of new methods. We won't actually need this update method, so we can just delete that because we won't need it. We'll need to create two of our own methods. One will be responsible for receiving the amount of damage that's going to be applied, like how much damage the player is taking, and then that's going to talk to another method, which will then update the size of the health bar, the width. Okay, so the first one we'll add is public void damage, and this is going to receive a value. We're going to have a float parameter here called damage. So in the player controller script, basically we can detect if the player's made contact with a spike, and then we can call this method to say how much damage the player is going to take, which will then call another method for updating. So this will update the player's health, and then it'll call another method for updating the health bar display. All right, so before we take damage or subtract from the player's health, we need to make sure that the health is not going to become a negative value. So firstly, I'm just going to check here and add an extra pair of parameters. If health dot total health minus equals damage is greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so what I'm doing here is accessing the health script and the total health variable. So this health script here has that variable created called total health. What we're going to do here is just check if we subtract the amount of damage that the player is taking. If we subtract from that and the result is greater than or equal to 0, then we will take off that amount of health. Otherwise, if health is going to become less than 0, then we're just going to set health to 0. We don't want health to become a negative value. Okay, so say health.total health minus equals damage. All right, so we'll take that damage and subtract that from the player's health, as long as it's going to result in a value of at least 0. Otherwise, or else, we'll just set the health to 0, so it doesn't become a negative value. Now, there's going to be another method here for updating the size of the health bar. So I'll add another method here called public void set size, and this will take a float value of size, and in here we're going to just say bar.local scale equals new vector 3 size, comma 1f. All right, so when this method's called, we're going to pass in the total health value, and it will be called size in this method. And then we're going to update the scale of the bar on the x-axis to be equal to that size. All right, so if the player's health is now 0.5, then the scale of the bar on the x-axis is going to be 0.5, and we'll leave it just as it is on the y-axis. It's not going to change. Okay, so after we've updated the health here, we can then just call that function. We can just say set size health.total health, and it will pass that value through to this method here. Okay, last thing to do here is in the start method, we'll just copy and paste this line here. So whenever we update the health, we then reflect that in the health bar by changing its size. But we'll also want to do that in the start method here, because every time a new scene is loaded, so when we move from one scene to the next, it's going to load this script, and we want to make sure that the health bar doesn't just go back to full health again when you start a new level, unless you want to. If you want to regenerate health at the start of a new level, you can. But if you want to, let's say you have half health at the end of level 1 and then you move into level 2, you'll still have that half health that'll be initialized at the start of that scene and displayed on the health bar. Okay, so save that script. And the next thing we'll need to do is go to the player controller script and add a little bit of code there, and we can go and test out those changes.